Well, now the battle of the hearts and minds, traditionally played out through diplomacy and propaganda, is being played out online. My next guest has almost 500 million views for his provocative commentary online, making him hugely influential.
What is he, you?
Hasan Piker streams live under the name HasanAbi. His analysis of the Israel-Hamas war has taken a highly critical stance towards Israel and Western media, and he's been calling me out for my coverage.
Because he only cares about...
Listen, you know what? Good for Hasan.
Israeli citizens. He does not care about Palestinians as human beings. That's why it's apples to oranges.
I disagree with that. I feel like that's an easy, like, listen, if you could, again, I'm more on Israel's side. I think everybody has the sentiment that they wish there could be peace, but I'm more on Israel's side. You know, both complicated. Jews were kicked out of their country, or kicked out 2,000 years ago. Then Palestinians were displaced or kicked out, I guess you could say, as well, like 100 years ago, less than that. But here's my thing. I think, yeah, sure. Why shouldn't Jewish people be able to have a place to hang out? Every other, like Christians have it, Muslims have a country. Why not? Why shouldn't the Jews have a country? It's their homeland. A lot of this is religiously centered, and more than anything else, people can criticize me all they want, but they have more Western values, which is more freedom and equality for gay people, women, trans people, etc. So they have those values. Hamas and Palestine do not share those same values, and so that's like my deciding factor on anything else. You can be as upset as you want, but I mean, both countries have some level of acclaim, and that's just where mine boils down to. So, I mean, that's where I'm going to pick. I'm obviously going to pick the ones that are closer to my values. I feel like it's weird that people are upset with that take, but hey, you know what? You do you. So yeah, I wish there wasn't a war. I don't want anybody to die. It's horrific. It's terrible. Who wants that to happen? I don't think anybody does. But ultimately, you're kind of forced to take a choice, or you could just not have a perspective, but that's the stance that I take. I don't know what to tell you.
It's like one side is a human, the other side is a barbaric monster child.
And I don't think that's true either. I watched him talk about it, and I don't think he thinks. I think Hamas is a terrorist organization, but the people of Palestine are not. They're victims as well.
I never said that, obviously. He says that he'd like nothing more than to come on to Uncensored and call me a baboon in a suit to my face. Well, here I am, a baboon, and he can join me now. I'm joined by...
This is Hasan's time to shine.
Thank you very much, Steve, coming on.
Thank you for having me, Piers. It's very early here in Los Angeles, California, but I'm going to try...
Okay, this must have happened earlier.
To do my very best to not do my British accent while I'm here.
Okay. Well, I appreciate that. And listen, I appreciate you coming on. Explain to me why you consider me a stenographer for the Israeli government, given that in the last week, I think more than any other host in the world, I have given lengthy platforms to pro-Palestinian voices to articulate that side of the argument.
No, I do have to commend you. You certainly have had more pro-Palestinian voices than the rest of the British media and certainly the rest of Western media in general. Now, as far as saying that you're a stenographer, I said that journalists are not supposed to be stenographers, and yet when it comes down to it, in most circumstances, in whatever conflict...
Wait, what do you mean journalists aren't supposed to be stenographers? That doesn't make any sense to me. So I used to date a stenographer. A stenographer is somebody who just records information and puts it down. If anything, we need more journalists to be stenographers, people who just display information as unbiased as possible, because that's one of the biggest problems. I mean, we're at a point now where you're never going to get unbiased information, even if it's a small partial bias through somebody when it comes to news. But that's how news is supposed to interact. They should be stenographers. Here's what happened. We're going to use the same language for both sides. Why would you want people to not be stenographers? Like, stenography isn't about creative writing or taking a side. I think that if we had more of that, we'd see less divisiveness in our media and in our everyday lives. So why that take?
We may be in.
Because a stenographer is somebody who just records things down, usually in courtrooms, but it can happen for other people, with some people with disabilities as well, that might need to have notes drawn out for them as well. So I don't understand.
Stenographers for whichever party is aligning with the American State Department and the interests of the West in general. And Israel happens to be the one in this ongoing conflict.
Yeah. And by the way, yes. I mean, I don't, like, you get angry at me as you want. Yeah. Part of it is I'd rather preserve Western ideals. People get so offended by that because the West has done bad things, right? Colonization, shit like that. 1000%. Criticize that. Guess what? It's the only country where you can criticize that. Only countries with Western values are the countries that you can criticize them, their own country. Other countries are much worse when it comes to their corruption. You can't even get, like, you know, Hamas was elected however many years ago, hasn't had an election since. Russia, basically just as bad. We're living in the freest world ever. Why wouldn't I want to fight for the values for other people to also have that as well? I know it sounds shitty, but like, well, not really. It doesn't. I'm tired. Like, why shouldn't I say that? You know, you guys will say, like, punch a Nazi in the face, but then, you know, when it comes down to it, you won't take it into account that we live in the freest country. And so, like, hey, what the fuck? I don't know. Like, that's just where I look at it from. I'm not saying you can't feel bad I feel horrible for Palestinian people. And I understand that Hamas is a terrorist organization that is born from oppression that Israel, like the Israel government, puts onto them. Absolutely. They're not acting perfectly either. I understand that, acknowledge that, but I also understand and acknowledge both sides are shitty in different ways. And so, like, you know, this is called a difficult decision. It's hard. It's not easy. Like, it's a tough situation, and you know, this is where, you know, you have to lift your balls up. So yeah, I'm going to support the more Western country because Western values typically mean less oppression onto the citizens of that country. So
it's interesting that you call me a propagandist because I want to play.
You're generally trying to understand how Western values play into this conflict. Honest question. Yeah, though they play into the conflict because for me, this is the biggest deciding factor. I'd rather support a state that is less oppressive to its people than a state that is more oppressive to its people. I think that there's a massive aspect there. Like, that's the deciding factor. We're talking about two different groups that were displaced at some point, and have been fighting each other and killing each other for a long time. It's sad. And so I'm going to make the decision based on that one. You know? That's pretty much it. I mean, it's the deciding factor. It does play into account. I'm going to support the country where I could live in and be less oppressed. You know, that's my deciding factor. If it's not for you, totally understand that. But for me, it's pretty big. So
this was your reaction to when the hospital got
I'm
bombed.
a propagandist.
Well, no,
For the record.
I'm not calling
I'm a
you that.
propagandist.
I'm just saying.
What?
I'm going to play you.
I'm saying I am.
Okay, well then I want to.
I'm saying I am.
I just want to.
that's just a dumb thing to say. Okay. It's going to destroy his credibility. Nobody's going to listen to Hasan and be like, "Oh, this guy's reasonable. I agree with him." If you want this is already going very poorly.
You even play it.
Okay, I'm going to play the clip. This is your reaction to the bombing of the hospital the other night.
While I was in the process of getting ready for the stream, Israel enacted one of the singular worst strikes they have done thus far, and an Israeli airstrike hit the Al Ahli hospital in Gaza City, where thousands of civilians were seeking medical treatment and shelter from the relentless bombing campaign.
Now, interestingly, when you were saying that,
That's terrible. Did they evacuate that before they bombed it? Because I know that they were trying to get people to.
I was coming on air too, and I took a position based probably on 30 years of being a journalist, running major newspapers, working at CNN and others, of waiting, of just saying, I think we should just wait and see what has actually happened here, get clarification, see who's actually to blame before we start passing judgment. You raced in to assume, as many people did, by the way, including the New York Times, BBC, mainstream media, and of course most of the Arab world then followed, that this was clearly, indisputably, an Israeli airstrike on this hospital. And yet all the evidence now suggests very strongly that it wasn't, that in fact this was a rocket that misfired coming from a terrorist group inside Gaza.
So apparently a terrorist group, Hamas possibly, or one of the other terrorist organizations that Hamas allows, basically, misfired a missile and hit a hospital and it killed people. Interesting. Okay.
My question
Let's
to
see
you
the
is
pushback.
this. Why would you
I wouldn't go that far.
Why
Piers.
would you be so certain in what you said before you knew?
Let's see how he answers this.
Okay. So first and foremost, before we get started on this conversation, let's understand something very important here. There's no electricity in Gaza.
Okay.
Internet is patchy in Gaza.
Okay.
There's no food in Gaza. There's no water in Gaza.
Okay.
This is all by design. This is because Gaza is under a brutal blockade,
Yeah, because there's a terrorist organization that just attacked Israel, people of Israel, and so now they're retaliating by cutting off supplies. That's usually what you do first, hoping that they will submit. Yeah. Okay.
occupation by the Israeli government. Okay?
So what does that have to do with the
that
misinformation
plays a role
aspect?
in the fog of war and the misinformation that gets spread.
Okay.
Having said that, however, you made it seem as though there is a certainty that this was 100% not an Israeli airstrike.
No, I didn't.
No, he didn't. He literally just said that it's like almost certain that it wasn't. Not 100% certainty, but all he said, like all the evidence we have says that it's most likely a misfire.
I didn't.
And instead,
I literally just said it's not a certainty.
Okay, sorry.
I said the
then I
evidence.
misunderstood
The
you.
evidence is
Then I
increasingly
misunderstood
pointing to this not being an Israeli airstrike, and that is expert evidence
Okay,
from people who have no
Oh my
skin in the
God.
game at all.
Yes. Well, I don't know which expert you're talking about, because I think Channel 4 did a pretty good job. As a matter of fact, I would say Channel 4 did probably the best job so far in analyzing everything that the IDF has said. But the reason why I believed, and I still do believe, that the likelihood is that this was an Israeli bombing campaign wasn't only because of the singular verifiable video, the phone video from the balcony that had all of the markings of an airstrike, the fact that the Israeli Air Force was enacting a bombing campaign in the region at the time, according to the Al Jazeera live streaming footage that everyone is using but doesn't understand. The fact that the digital media person for the IDF immediately came out and said that this was actually an airstrike that hit a Hamas target, and that he was sad that there were, casualties at the end of the day, but this was a Hamas target and celebrated it. And more importantly, I guess, the fact that this hospital had been bombed by Israel. This hospital had been bombed by Israel on Saturday.
All right, a good answer. Like, oh, there we go. We got it. That sounds like a good. I don't know what side did what. It sounds like it might have been a misfire. Maybe Hasan's right. Maybe it's not a misfire. All right, this is the first time he's not like weirdly like just being bizarre in his interpretation. Okay, cool.
22 hospitals have, as a matter of fact, been bombed by Israel since.
But I mean, okay.
This last saga in the occupation, and
sure, but my thing is okay. So, and listen, I may not know, but this is a question. Was it announced? Because my understanding is that Israel is telling people to evacuate areas so that they can bomb it. So, wouldn't they have known that that was going to get bombed in the first place? But I guess if the guy came out and said that, okay, I have to look into it.
This hospital had been bombed directly by Israel, where the cancer ward was destroyed. Israel has been bombing all of these hospitals. Israel has been calling all of these hospitals to evacuate over and over and over again. The medical professionals at the hospital had been called by the Israeli government the day prior, and everyone on the ground assumes that this is an Israeli airstrike. They are the ones who experienced the situation.
Listen, Hasan,
so when you have
but the
every
truth
single,
is,
can I just finish this?
If you watch the
Can I just finish
BBC,
this?
if you watch the BBC account of all this last night, by their Verify unit, which was specifically set up by the BBC to be completely dispassionate in these investigations, and they reached a pretty clear conclusion based on circumstantial evidence. I'll make that clear, that this would not have been an Israeli airstrike, including, for example, the size of the crater, which bears no relation to the size of craters normally left by Israeli. So, look, my point is, neither of us know for sure. But you took to your...
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading into it. The IDF have released audio from a purported conversation between two Hamas operatives discussing the alleged misfiring of an Islamic Jihad rocket that Israel says landed on the I can't read the hospital name, in Gaza. CNN cannot independently confirm what caused the explosion at the hospital and cannot verify the authenticity of the audio tape. Okay, so we really just don't know. That's what it comes down to. We really just don't know. Okay. Interesting. It's possible that they're trying to cover it up. I mean, me personally, I feel like I don't know. I guess they could be if they're really propagandists. My understanding, though, I don't know. Maybe. I mean, that makes sense if they have a typical size. I guess you could run with the idea that maybe they wanted it to seem like they were bombing themselves to try to make the citizens feel unsafe. Because now Hamas is like, fucking up, so you shouldn't support them. I don't really know. Okay.
Airwaves immediately.
None of us do.
Because actually you're, I wouldn't even say unconscious bias, your admitted propagandist bias on your part was that you wanted that to be an Israeli airstrike. It suited your narrative.
Damn.
And I would say that in itself, in its way,
wanted it to be
is
an
being a
Israeli
stenographer.
Well, yeah, no, you kind of, this is the problem. Hasan came on and said, yeah, I'm a propagandist. And like maybe he has a good explanation, but this isn't the time to throw out dumb fucking hot takes. So now what you've communicated to the entire audience is that like you have a massive bias that will lean towards Hamas, I guess, or Palestine. So yeah, no, like that's what's happening is like if the strike happened, you would have wanted it to be them. I mean, he's right. You fucked yourself up optically on this conversation by just being silly. Because I don't know why else you'd be like, well, I am a propagandist, Pierce. Like, why would, that's just a terrible, how long have you been doing this? Why would you communicate like that? Why would you think, if your goal is to come on and say, I want to be a really good representative of the Palestinian people, that's fine. Why would you lead with, I'm a propagandist? Optically, it doesn't look good at all. Nobody's going to start agreeing with you because of that. It doesn't have any, it's not positive. It doesn't help your side. There's no interpretation that would ever make it help your side. So, like, of course he's going to say that. That's what it communicates to people, that you're going to intentionally be biased as possible, and you're not going to try to parse through information intelligently.
You accuse me of being a stenographer. I try and be fair and get to the truth. In your case, I don't think you try to do that. I think you appeal to your audience, appeal to your base.
Damn.
You don't really care whether the facts are there or not.
Damn.
This is entirely unfair because
Not
you just
really.
said circumstantial evidence favors that this was not an Israeli airstrike.
Yeah.
Yeah, he said, yes, that's fair. He's giving you all the information. Like, I hate this because I don't like agreeing with Pierce. He's saying, like, hey, we don't 100% know, but based on what we have, it seems like this might have been, or it's more likely, in his opinion, that it was a misfire. So it's like he's not telling you that he's 100% right, correct, or accurate. He's just like, here's the information that I'm going to display for you. I mean, dude, like, this is, oh my God.
I gave you all of the circumstantial evidence that it does favor that this is an Israeli airstrike. The reason why, however, circumstantial evidence is not enough. And the one thing that I will concede to, because when more information did come out, and no, I do not mean when Israel said that they did not bomb this hospital and it was actually Hamas, and then they turned around and went, never mind, it's not Hamas, it's actually Islamic Jihad. And then they said, we have more evidence coming out in a couple.
Well, that specific thing, like, you know, there are other organizations there. So if they had just misrepresented which one it was, they whatever, I don't care about that, but I get what he's saying.
Hours. And then the evidence came out, and it turns out it sounded like the phone conversations that they were able to intercept, supposedly, sounded like, by experts at the very least, to be completely false and completely made up.
Yeah, but Hasan, I don't think, listen, in all honesty, I don't think, even as you're saying all this, I think you're a smart guy.
Piers, let me finish.
I think you've looked at all of this, and I think in your heart, you know this was probably not an Israeli airstrike. And I'm just curious why you would, instead of...
Hasan has, like, the good talking points. Like, I'm not, you know, if what he's saying is true, and if Pierce can't counter that, I'd imagine that I doubt that he's unprepared. He has an entire team. So he might be right. It's just that he'll say dumb shit that ruins the entire optics of the situation. Like, I am a propagandist. So...
No, as facts change,
that is
your
not what I'm
change.
saying. That is not what I'm saying at all.
I don't understand why you would double and treble down when the evidence is pointing the other way.
You're asking me to be on your show. Do you want to talk?
Yes.
If you're asking me to be on your show, and I want to be on the show, thank you so much for having me on your show. Let me explain exactly what I said, and let me explain to you why I think still, to this very moment, until there is a third-party investigation that is concluded by the UN, the International Criminal Court, or specifically a forensic analyst that looks at the situation, is allowed to be on the ground. This is not just my perspective. This is B'Tselem as well, which is an Israeli organization that has also demanded a third-party investigation occur. I am not going to conclusively say that this was not Israel's fault.
I don't expect you to.
Because I just gave you, and not because I'm a propagandist. As far as me being a propagandist,
you just said he was. What?
This goes, everyone is a propagandist. I'm just honest about it. You're a propagandist. We have our biases.
I'm curious who you think I'm a propagandist
honest
for.
About my biases.
Who do you think I'm a propagandist for?
Who do I think you're a propagandist for? Whichever you're.
So that like, this is the problem, is that like his understanding of the word propagandist is just non-existent. So if you look up what a propagandist is, it's characterized by ideas, facts, or allegations spread deliberately to further a cause or to damage an opposing cause. I don't That's I would not consider. If you consider yourself a propagandist, you're a scumbag, right? I have my beliefs, and I'm open to them being wrong. Now, you might argue that Piers Morgan does that too. I don't really know in this situation. He seems like an honest guy. He just sometimes seems like an idiot, in my opinion. Whatever. But this is saying that he's intentionally characterizing ideas, facts, allegations deliberately spread to destroy the other side. So, like, what he's done is he's assigned this idea. First of all, Hasan has just admitted that he's just always will speak disparagingly of Israel. That's it. That's the admitting here. Why? That's stupid. Like, why would you want to be a propagandist? You might have a bias, but a propagandist is intentional disinformation. What a propagandist is, hey, I support this side, so I'm going to absolutely intentionally push false information to further my cause. That's what Hasan is saying. I think that he's trying to be like super woke right now, but all Hasan is saying is that he's an idiot. That's all it boils down to. So
every media person is doing propaganda.
But who
no,
for?
they're not.
I've got to be doing it with somebody.
You think it's a bad word? I don't. That's just the difference.
I do.
I think it's actually quite a serious charge. Hasan, I think it's a serious charge to level,
Okay.
not as a podcaster, but as a journalist who's broadcasting around the world, who has a reputation, I believe, for being fair and impartial, actually, on these issues. It's quite a charge to just say, I'm a stenographer for the Israeli government, or I'm a propagandist. I don't think there's any evidence I'm either of those things. I'm curious who you think I am doing the propaganda for.
While we're having this conversation, 3,000 Piers, while we're having this back and forth.
Okay, a stenographer is a person trained to type or write in shorthand methods, enabling them to write as quickly as possible. Is that what you're supposed to mean when you're a stenographer? Like, is that what they mean? Like, you're just trying to write down bullet points and you're not getting all the information? I don't understand the stenographer thing. I guess it's just beyond me.
3,840 Palestinians have been ruthlessly slaughtered in the last incursion into Gaza. I feel like this is an incredibly selfish, self-centered conflict.
It is. It's horrible. And it's also, unfortunately, a response from Israeli people. What is it? 1,400 of them getting killed. So...
conversation to have. You asked me to be on here. You wanted to hear my perspective. I'm willing to give it to you. I don't want to talk about I don't want to talk about Noam Chomsky style manufacturing consent conversations about how the media is operating at the behest of capital.
You were the guy. Listen, you were the guy that called me.
There are dead people.
Listen, Hasan, I only asked you because you're the guy that called me a propagandist and called me a baboon in a suit. I was curious as to why. You don't want to say who I'm doing the propaganda for. We'll move on. I agree with you. There's a bigger picture here. Let's move on. Let's take a short break. Hasan, let's take a short break. I want to come back. I want to talk to you about what happened on October the 7th. Get your reaction to that.
They're taking a short break, guys. All right. Well, they're going to come back from the break. I guess we'll just... oh, wait. I could just skip forward. I'm like, watch. I'm so behind. What am I doing? I'm so dumb.
Piker is still with me. Hasan, I want to just play you a clip of something that you said about the October 7th terror attacks, and in particular, the attack at the music festival, which killed 260 people.
Look at this guy. You know what shouldn't happen? Killing 260 people at a music festival. No, you're right, man. That just happened on its own because, like, bad guys wanted to do bad things. You're right. Dude, if they subjugated you to a open-air prison your whole life, you're going to break out eventually when you realize that there's no other way to get out of it.
I mean, it sounds to me there, Hasan.
Okay. I mean, I understand that perspective. That's a fair... I mean, I think that's a somewhat reasonable perspective. Sure. Okay.
That you...
I think that... Well, I mean, it's on a stream, so you're not always acting like you're prim and properist. So, like, yeah, it's an uncomfortable perspective. There are plenty of Palestinians who feel like they are. I mean, like, my understanding is Gaza is effectively a ghetto. Again, I think that there should be an Israeli state there as well. Obviously, it's nice to be like, oh, well, they could exist in harmony. It would be great. Not, if they had a dual government or something, that'd be great. But like, yeah, even if I think that there is a claim to some land there for Jewish people, like, yeah, also like those people are effectively prisoners in Gaza to an extent, whether they're not allowed out because of Israeli people or Hamas not letting them out or whatever. Like, yeah, so they're frustrated. I understand that. Like, sure, that's a reasonable argument. Sure.
Are in some way saying they had it coming. Were you?
No, I wouldn't say that they had it coming. I think that Michael Brooks used to say, analysis is not justification. And while obviously civilian casualties and horrific barbaric acts that were committed on October 7 are completely unacceptable, the important thing to make sure that it never happens again is to analyze what are the conditions as to how it happened to begin with.
Okay,
and
sure.
I think Ehud Barak is going to be on in a little bit as well, or maybe he's on before me. Yeah. And I'm almost certain that while he has held the keys to the conversation and held the levers of the power in this conversation in many key and critical points, I would go so far as to say that he is among many others who also recognize that the Bibi Netanyahu administration is responsible. This is not just my assessment. This is 85% of the Israeli population's assessment at the time. This is years and years and years of refusing to negotiate with the Palestinian Authority.
My understanding is that Palestine was looking to negotiate and that Hamas was the one that wouldn't negotiate. I mean, no? Isn't that part of like their whole thing that they won't negotiate? They want like Jews to not be allowed. Hamas. I'm not talking about Palestinian people. So are they willing to negotiate? Am I misinformed? I don't know.
Don't take my word for it.
Let's see what Pierce's
pushback
is.
I would agree. Listen, I would agree again.
In a closed-door conversation with Likud members, he said that if you want to thwart any kind of Palestinian nation state, you must do everything you can to only negotiate with Hamas. We control how high the fire goes. He has given cash to Hamas by way of Qatar. There is no bigger fan of Hamas than Bibi Netanyahu, which I hope one day you can maybe interview, and then you'll ask him to.
No, I actually did interview him a few months ago, and I did actually spell out to him that there have been a lot more Palestinian deaths this year so far, up to the point of the interview, than Israelis, and what he intended to do about it. He said then he didn't believe in collective responsibility, which is now this hot phrase in this whole crisis about whether you would hold all people in Gaza responsible for Hamas. Interesting to see if when they...
Yeah, so my understanding is you're not supposed to engage in collective responsibility. Like, you shouldn't hold all Palestinian people to account for Hamas. I think that that's wrong.
Can I ask you a question?
Let me just finish my point. If they do then launch a ground invasion, it'd be interesting to see if they keep to that word. You know, I'm not a defender of what Bibi Netanyahu has been doing in Israel. In the last year, his attack on the credibility and integrity of the Supreme Court, I think, has been a disgrace. And I think it has fractured society in Israel. I also think that it's caused so much social unrest and had such big protests that you could argue it's taken the eye off the ball of the people who should have been defending the border because they've been trying to sort out what's been going on domestically, internally inside Israel. So I think it's a catastrophic failure of intelligence, of security, of defense, all of those things. I'll be amazed, frankly, if Netanyahu survives this. So I'm certainly not here to defend him, even if you do view me as a stenographer for his government. My question for you, I think, is this, is that I've had a lot of problems trying to get people on the pro-Palestinian side to separate two things. That you can say, as I believe and you believe, that the Palestinians have been maltreated for decades. That the situation where they are effectively, I mean, I don't even call it an occupation because Israelis aren't in Gaza. They pulled out in 2005, but they still control the ability of Gazans.
This is why I call you a propagandist.
I'm just saying.
It sounds like he was ready to say, well, they don't control it, but they do control their in and out. So Hasan, hold on, wait.
Still control the ability of Israelis aren't in Gaza. They pulled out in 2005, but they still control the ability of Gazans.
This is why I call you a propagandist.
I think there's a delay because Piers was literally conceding that they don't occupy Gaza, but they still have a control over it, which is unfair to the Palestinian people. And Hasan jumps instantly to go in there and be like, oh, see, this is why I call you propagandist, because you're downplaying. He's not downplaying. It's actually accurate, right? Maybe it's because there's a delay on the mic or something, but that's not a really good look.
Saying the phraseology is confusing to me because the reality is Israel exercises control over people in Gaza. It allows them in and out. It allows them to turn on the tap of water and so on and so on. I get all that. They don't actually live there because they can't live side by side with each other.
That's why it's called an open-air prison.
Right. I don't disagree with...
That's why they call it the world's largest open-air prison.
Yeah, but Hasan, I don't disagree with you. And I've pointed this out for a long time as a journalist. So we don't disagree about the appalling plight of Palestinian people. But the issue comes that if you can't separate that ongoing dispute between Israel and Palestine from the absolutely appalling barbarism of October the 7th, which was on a whole different scale to anything we've seen, where 1,400 people, Holocaust survivors, babies in their cribs, young women taken, tortured, abused, shot, beheaded, it was reported, and so on. If we can't look at that collectively, with a general humanity and degree.
My understanding is that the Israelis pulled out of, or the Israeli government pulled out of Gaza because they couldn't come to a peace deal, and so they kind of left it to them. So wouldn't somebody argue that that's basically their border, and that's why they have like such heavy or strict border security there? But then again, they don't just control like a border; they control supplies in and out, so that would be a huge issue. Do they control all the supplies? And they can't even get to the West Bank, right? Or maybe they can, but it's really difficult.
That is an absolute atrocity, then there's something wrong with this. And I find that the tribalism on both sides is now so toxic and so frenzied that you get people who literally can't. We've had a bunch of actors, right, signing this statement saying they want a ceasefire in Gaza and calling Israel war criminals and so on. But they don't say a word about the Hamas attacks that precipitated this. And I find that really hard,
right?
really hard to accept.
But do you agree with them? If they had said, for example, that October 7 attacks were brutal and massacres occurred, and then they said everything else, that Israel is committing war crimes, would you agree with them?
Okay, here's what I would honestly say about that. Is Israel not allowed to defend itself from the worst terror attack we've seen since 9/11? Is it not allowed to defend itself after 1,400 people in Israel are butchered in that way? And the question then, if you assume...
What's the propaganda? Propaganda isn't just you agree with a side. Propaganda is deliberate and intentional spread of misinformation to destroy the other side. And so if you genuinely believe that Israel has a claim to their own land, then that's just a bias. It's not a propaganda point. And so like the argument from Piers, and I generally agree with it, is, hey, Israeli people have a right to the land. And so if somebody attacks them in a terror attack that is on par with 9/11, which Hasan has said before that he thought it was justifiable, then why can't they defend themselves? That's the question. It doesn't make him a propagandist. The idea, it's a weird game Hasan's playing where he's focusing more on, right now on this point, on trying to disparage Pierce's credibility rather than actually engage with the argument.
That they are able to defend themselves as any free democratic country.
That is the Israeli State Department line. That is the IDF's line. That is the line that everyone
Hasan, let me ask you this. It then becomes a question of how can they defend themselves? If their mission now is to get rid of Hamas, a terror organization that's committed one of the worst acts of terror ever seen, if that is their stated aim, then what they are doing is consistent with that, isn't it?
No. Here's why this is actually an abject failure, and this is not just my perspective on the matter. I'm just a dumb idiot with a Twitch stream.
He's just a propagandist, guys. Don't worry.
Who is live reacting to the news and trying to make sense of everything as it's ongoing. I usually have a policy of not covering breaking news, and
but you did, didn't you? About that hospital, you covered breaking news. Okay, I don't think that's true. I think he's always had a policy of cover breaking news. In general, this is just like huge news. Like it's bigger than like whatever just generally going on. So he's obviously going to. Maybe he doesn't cover other breaking news like Amber Heard or Top Chef or something, but outside of that, like, yeah, he seems to, when it's something that he knows that he can financially, like, he can profit off of in some capacity.
And sometimes that policy is violated, but ultimately I am not held up by the same journalistic standards, even though I think I do a much better job than most other news outlets.
Yeah, that's what people think at every alternative media source. They think they do a better job. So
in general. So let me just say this really quickly. You said Israel has a right to defend itself. Absolutely zero people think that this is a ridiculous statement. However, how Israel is defending itself is collective punishment. Now, collective punishment in the form of depriving 2.2 million people of electricity, collective punishment in the form of depriving them of water, of food, collective punishment.
It's really unfair. The argument that they're going to use, and again, it makes sense, is that Hamas is hiding its weapons, it's hiding its, meeting places and whatnot in the city in very specific locations that are usually hospitals and whatnot, in order to goad people into attacking their people so that they can go, look, we're getting attacked. It's unfortunate. That's why Hamas is not for the people, the Palestinian people. And so, it's one of those things where they had a terror attack onto them. And, sometimes, the unfortunate reality, sometimes disproportionate force is necessary. It's sad. It's fucked up. It's terrible. They're giving people warnings to leave the area before they bomb areas. I don't know if they are, but they should set up in camps or whatnot, or not camps. But basically like places, refugee camps for Palestinian people to go to. But again, they're worried about the infiltration of Hamas and their own security. A lot of their own people have just died. That's always the priority of any country, is their own people first. That's how it should generally be. That is the point of you electing officials into your country, is to prioritize your people in your country first. And they're going to prioritize their people first. It sucks, but that's the reality. That is how people look at the situation. So
in the form of 51 people dying in the West Bank, where there is no Hamas in the West Bank, and yet 51 people have died because in the West Bank.
Well, I've heard that there are still some. Well, okay. So my understanding of the people dying in the West Bank is that it's being. There are people saying that they're attached to terrorist cells, but it's not really confirmed. So
settlers that are occupying Palestinian territory in violation of the international law, settlers who are doing an act of colonial terrorism, and this is not my statement on it, this is international law, that are doing horrifying things by simply just existing there and maintaining the presence with an occupying force in the form of IDF, who is ritualistically humiliating Palestinians in a structure that B'Tselem, an Israeli organization, calls the permit regime, where every waking moment of Palestinians' lives in the West Bank are absolute hell, where they have no legal recourse. 51 Palestinians have died, and that was before the Ramallah protest that happened last night, and the Israeli forces were opening up with live fire on protesters last night. So who knows what that death toll has become. This is all a product of Israel being an apartheid state. This is a violent apartheid state. There is no way to be a peaceful
Hasan,
apartheid.
Is it a violent apartheid state? I don't know if I would call it that. Again, there seems to have been, I don't know, I wouldn't call it peace, but there was, less conflict before they were attacked. Again, though, it does seem like there are people in Israel that keep attempting to land grab more and more from like other, Palestine. So sure, you could argue that. Again, I just overall think that they have a claim to some land. So maybe, I don't know, possibly.
It is a violence. It is a violence required for its maintenance.
Okay, listen.
And that violence is frustrating people.
I hear you.
That violence is radicalizing people.
But here's
as far as Israel, as far as what Benjamin Netanyahu has done, as far as the war government, what they have done, Piers, going into Gaza and bombing Gaza and killing 3,480 Palestinians so far in Gaza, 1,000 plus children out of all of those casualties, 22 hospitals being bombed, a bakery, the only remaining intact bakery being bombed yesterday. These are horrifying crimes that you would openly say are horrifying and unjustifiable when Russia does it, but when Israel does it, Israel has a right to defend itself. This is...
Well, nobody's invading Russia. So that's the only difference of that, is that Russia's actively invading Ukraine. But, I guess you'd argue that Israel's invading them, but it was a provoked attack. So it's just a very disproportionate attack.
Identical to the same talking points that I've heard from every Israeli administration official. It's the same talking points that I've heard from American politicians championing the exact same talking points. It's the same thing that I've heard from everyone else in the media. You might have been against the Iraq war.
I feel like the media is leaning pretty heavily towards Palestine's favor, no? That's what I've seen mostly, outside of conservative media, of course, but it seems like most progressive media is speaking negatively of Israel, right?
And you use that, but you're using that for evil, in my opinion, at this point. If you are not sitting here and condemning those acts of war crimes, those acts of violence, those acts of collective punishment.
Well, I would say to that I think the death of any child in this conflict is horrific, absolutely horrific.
Yeah, I'd say Hamas should surrender, and then this will stop. So,
but the question comes down to me that after an act of terror, as we
you don't understand the comparison to the Ukraine war. That's Hasan is a pretty big thing where he thinks that the only reason people care about like the violence in Ukraine is because the media talks about it, and there's a level of truth to that, but he thinks it's very disingenuous. So that's his talking point for that.
We saw on October the 7th, Israel should be able to defend itself and should be able to go after the people that perpetrated that, who live amongst civilians in Gaza deliberately. And the question for me becomes down to what is proportionate? I don't know the answer, Hasan. I'll be honest with you. I don't know what that answer is.
I do know the answer to that.
What is
I do know the answer to that. Last night I had Dr.
Right.
Ofer Kassif, an Israeli Knesset member who was expelled, suspended for 45 days for saying what I believe is the truth. Championing the exact same position of the
right, so what's the answer?
Editorial board.
Okay, be concise.
There are a lot of thoughtful people, a lot of formative Holocaust scholars, a lot of historians that all agree on the same point.
Okay, what point?
The reason why violence that even penetrates through the Israeli security blanket that people thought existed, that penetrated through that Iron Dome, the Iron Wall, if you want to call it that, is because of years and years of oppression and years of violence, which is a necessity to maintain an apartheid state. And this has to stop. There's only two ways out of this. Either you engage in full-blown ethnic cleansing, and if you
so Hamas was elected to power in 2006. Israel left Gaza. Okay, in 2005. Okay, sure. Maybe that is, yeah, sure. I mean, they left Gaza and it sounds like they've had a hold on it. Sure. So how do you do that? Like, what's the solution? Because now it's spread too far. If that's your argument, I mean, it's not a bad argument. You know, they left Gaza. They've had too much of a control over Gaza since 2006 or 2005. So what do you do now? I don't know. I mean, that's the complicated area because now you have a literal terrorist organization running the people there. What do you do? How do you move forward? I don't even know if it's possible to move forward. I mean, unless they came to an agreement somehow, some kind of like land separation. But then the question is like, how does the people in the Gaza Strip, how do they make money? I know it sounds weird, but we make money based on different interests that we collect and we own. So if you have oil, for instance, your country can be very rich if you sell the oil. What does the Gaza Strip have that is valuable enough for them to live in like prosperity?
You listen to the likes of Smotrich, or if you listen to the likes of Itamar Ben-Gvir and these very unfavorable, unpopular, far-right figures, if you listen to Netanyahu and his Likud government, they say that they are interested in going in that direction, the ethnic cleansing direction, the ethnic displacement direction.
Well, isn't Hamas also interested in killing all Jews? Like, so that's kind of where we're at. We're at a point where like both sides hate each other.
Or the only way out of this for a real solution is to move towards peace,
okay.
to genuinely
How? What do you do?
to genuinely end the blockade, to end the apartheid, to end the occupation, and create a pathway towards citizenship for all people with a right to return, for all 14 million Palestinians,
all right, I agree with that.
Which live under Israeli occupation. It's brutal, and then the rest living in diaspora. These are not unreasonable requests.
I think that's fair. I mean, that's basically what I said earlier. Like, make them all citizens of like one country. Sure, why not?
These are requests that understand the dignity and the humanity of one side and does not simply treat them as their colonial subjects. And it's the only way to create permanent security and prosperity.
It's so funny. He uses random accents for some words, like a white mom trying to say fajita is a Mexican. He does. I was thinking the same thing. He literally sounds like my mom trying to speak Spanish. You know, I know he's from Turkey or whatever, but still, it's funny when people will use an accent for somebody's name. I'll just butcher it in my American speech because I feel like that's like less ignorant. because I don't want to appropriate your voice, you know what I mean? But also, I guess he's from Turkey, maybe, I don't know, whatever. Do you know?
Disparity in the region.
If it was as simple as that, I'm sure that would have happened already. I would say this.
Well, yeah, of course, not as simple as that, but that's a good solution. I would just say, like, yeah, I agree with you. I just don't know how likely it is. Hopefully we get there. I mean, there's nothing else to really say.
I agree with a lot of what you've just said. Not all of it, a lot of it. I don't think you can ever achieve peace now with Hamas controlling Gaza. I don't think you can achieve
Then
peace.
the question is like, well, how do Palestinian people trust Israel after all this to not have that as their government? Like, what is the goal? What do you say? Like, hey, elect a new government, new representatives. I mean, how does it work? Is there going to be like a new political movement there, and then you're going to back that political movement, and then you're going to hope that they come to the table in like a more reasonable way? Like, how does that work out?
With Netanyahu in charge of Israel, actually, after this. I don't think his own people will want him to be in charge of Israel down below when they examine exactly how this happened. But we will see. But Hasan, I've got to leave it there. Look, it's good to talk to you. You know, you're an important, influential voice to a lot of people. And I think we have a lot of common ground, and there are some things that we disagree about. But I suspect it's not as much as you think. You know, I do think that the core problem here has got to get resolved in a way that's been completely ignored for decades. And until it gets resolved, until the plight of the Palestinian people is resolved, until all these young people in Palestine feel there's some sense of hope and they can get out of what effectively is, as you say, a prison camp, then nothing is going to change. I don't think it justifies in any... Let me just say, I've got to finish it, but I don't think it justifies in any way what happened on October the 7th. But I do agree with you that until that core problem gets...
I don't think it justifies it, but it explains it, right? You know,
it's resolved. There will never be peace. Hasan, I appreciate you joining me. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
That sounds a little frustrating. You didn't get more time to talk.
And since the next, I'll be joined by...
All right. Well, that's that. That's all I want to look at. Listen, here's the thing. That was... Hasan clearly knows what he's talking about. He's just not very good at communicating to people that disagree with him. The whole tangent of trying to say we're all propagandists is like a really weird... I understand what he's saying. What he's trying to say is everybody has a bias and everybody will kind of purport information that is going to encourage that bias, or they will filter it through that bias. The problem is that's not what propaganda is. Propaganda is intentional disinformation to effectively destroy the other side. I don't want to do that. I don't think most people do. I would hope Hasan doesn't. Him saying that communicates to me that he does. Weird. And so, like, I think he lost a lot of the battle from an optics perspective there. So outside of that, though, like, some pretty solid, interesting points. I mean, I could appreciate it. I just wish that he would stop being a dick and he would just come off better, because you could say, like, well, why does he care about you? Because I'm like a person that disagrees with him. Like, what doesn't care about me? But isn't the whole point to have these conversations? Is it so that you can just make money, or is it so that you can try to communicate to the other side, like, your cause? And so, in my opinion, I'd say overall some pretty solid points, stuff to think about. But also, I don't know how many people watch that and were like, my mind's changed. I don't know how many. I just don't know. I don't know if that's happened. So, yeah. Pogger.